Deion Sanders just went on national television and dropped a bombshell so massive, so unexpected, and so game-changing that the entire NFL draft landscape shifted in real time. After weeks of publicly destroying the Cleveland Browns as a toxic wasteland, after threatening to make Shedeur sit out an entire year if they dared to draft him, after calling Jimmy Haslam the worst owner in football, Deion looked directly into the camera this morning and said the words nobody thought they'd ever hear. Cleveland is not just an option anymore. Cleveland is the destination. If the Browns draft Shedeur at 3rd overall, we're signing immediately. We're embracing that organization, and we're going to build a championship dynasty in Cleveland that people will talk about for generations. The host's jaw literally dropped, social media exploded within seconds, and NFL executives watching live immediately started scrambling to figure out what the hell just happened in the 72 hours since Deion's last appearance, when he was threatening nuclear war against the Browns. The answer, according to sources who were inside the secret negotiation that changed everything, is that the Cleveland Browns just pulled off the most aggressive, most expensive, and most unprecedented recruitment of a draft prospect in NFL history. And it involves way more than just a rookie contract, way more than football, and way more money than anyone outside that room realizes. The bombshell dropped at 9:47 a.m. on Wednesday, February 26, 2026, during a live segment on the same sports network where Deion Sanders had been appearing regularly throughout the pre-draft process. According to sources familiar with how the appearance came together, the network had invited Deion back specifically to discuss the fallout from his controversial Cleveland warning issued just days earlier, expecting him to either defend his position or perhaps soften it slightly after receiving pressure from NFL circles about the appropriateness of a father publicly telling teams not to draft his son. The producers had prepared questions about whether Deion worried his ultimatum might make other teams nervous about drafting Shedeur, whether he'd heard from Browns officials, and whether he still stood by his characterization of Cleveland as dysfunctional and toxic. But according to sources who spoke with Deion before he went on air, none of those questions were going to matter because Deion was about to completely flip the script in a way nobody anticipated. When the segment began, the host opened with standard pleasantries and then immediately went to what they assumed was the main topic, asking Deion whether he'd had any second thoughts about his very public warning to the Browns. And that's when, according to sources watching from the control room, Deion smiled in that particular way he has when he knows he's about to say something that will shock everyone, and he launched into what can only be described as one of the most dramatic reversals in sports media history. I want to start by saying something that I think is going to surprise a lot of people, Deion began, his voice carrying that mix of confidence and excitement that people who know him recognize as genuine rather than performative. Everything I said about Cleveland just a few days ago, all of that was true at the time. The dysfunction was real, the toxicity was real, the locker room chaos was real, and I meant every word when I said I couldn't send my son into that environment. The hosts nodded, assuming this was leading to Deion doubling down on his criticism, but then Deion continued in a direction nobody saw coming. But here's what I also need people to understand. Organizations can change, leadership can evolve, and sometimes all it takes is the right pressure at the right moment to force people to confront their failures and actually fix them. And that's exactly what happened with the Cleveland Browns over the past 72 hours. Because my public warning, my threat to sit Shedeur out if they drafted him, that lit a fire under Jimmy Haslam and that entire organization in a way that nothing else had. And what they've done in response to that pressure is nothing short of revolutionary. One of the hosts, clearly confused about where this was going, interjected to ask what specifically had changed, and Deion's response was the beginning of the bombshell revelation. Everything changed. Kevin Stefanski is completely gone from any Browns involvement, not just fired, but severed entirely. Jimmy Haslam has put in writing legally binding documents that he will not interfere in football operations and that Todd Monken has complete authority over everything related to building this roster and developing Shedeur. The locker room drama that was happening with Watson and Clive Brown and all of that, it's being resolved with Watson being moved out and a complete culture reset happening. And most importantly, the Browns have made commitments to me and to Shedeur that are so comprehensive and so powerful that they completely change the calculus of whether Cleveland is a good situation.
The other host jumped in asking what kind of commitments Deion was talking about, and this is where, according to sources, Deion started revealing details that shocked not just the television audience, but apparently even some people inside the Browns organization who didn't realize how much Deion was willing to disclose publicly. "The Browns have committed to making me a formal part of their organization," Deion said, his voice carrying genuine excitement now, not just as Shedeur's father who shows up to games, but as a paid advisor with real authority over player development, culture building, and organizational strategy. "I'll have an office at the facility, I'll be in meetings, I'll have input on coaching hires and roster decisions. And this isn't some ceremonial title. This is real power backed by a real salary that reflects the value I'm bringing to their organization." The hosts were visibly stunned, and one of them asked the obvious follow-up question about whether this arrangement was essentially the Browns paying Deion to change his public position on Cleveland. And Deion's answer, according to sources, was delivered with zero embarrassment or defensiveness. "Absolutely it is, and you know what? I'm not ashamed of that. The Browns recognized that they needed to change their organization fundamentally to be worthy of my son's talent, and they recognized that getting me involved as part of that change would accelerate their transformation, so they made me an offer that reflects those realities. And after consulting with my advisors, my attorneys, my financial team, and most importantly with Shedeur himself, we decided that what Cleveland is offering represents the best possible situation for Shedeur's career and for our family's future." What Deion was describing on live television and what sources familiar with the actual negotiations are now revealing in more detail was the result of a secret marathon negotiation session that took place on Sunday and Monday, February 23rd and 24th, at a private location away from the Browns facility to avoid media detection. According to sources who were briefed on what happened, the meeting was requested urgently by the Browns after Deion's public warning created a crisis situation where the entire draft strategy was at risk of collapsing. Present, according to sources, were Jimmy Haslam, Andrew Berry, Todd Monken, 3 Browns attorneys, including their general counsel, Deion Sanders, Shedeur Sanders, who participated in portions of the meeting, Deion's personal attorney, and a financial advisor who works with the Sanders family. The meeting began, according to sources, with Jimmy Haslam doing something he's rarely done in his 14 years as Browns owner. He apologized. According to sources who were briefed on Haslam's opening statement, he told Deion directly that everything Deion said publicly about Browns' dysfunction was accurate, that Haslam took responsibility for creating much of that dysfunction through his meddling and poor decisions, and that he was genuinely committed to changing how the organization operates. But more significantly, according to sources, Haslam told Deion that he needed help making those changes stick, that bringing in someone like Deion who has credibility and influence and who isn't afraid to call out problems would help keep Haslam accountable in ways that internal staff couldn't.
That admission, according to sources, was what opened the door to the broader discussion about Deion having an actual role with the Browns, rather than just being a concerned parent. Over the next several hours, according to sources, the Browns laid out a comprehensive proposal that addressed every concern Deion had raised publicly and created incentives that made Cleveland not just acceptable, but potentially the most attractive destination in the draft. The proposal, according to sources who've reviewed the key terms, included 5 major components that, when combined, represent an unprecedented package for a draft prospect and his family. The first component, according to sources, was the formal severance of Kevin Stefanski from any Browns involvement. The Browns provided documentation showing that Stefanski's consulting arrangement with the Falcons included non-compete language, preventing him from working with Cleveland in any capacity for the next 3 years, and they committed in writing that they would not seek his advice or input on Shedeur's development under any circumstances. This was critical to Deion because of the bad blood between the Sanders family and Stefanski over his alleged negative recruiting against Shedeur. The second component, according to sources, was a legally binding non-interference agreement signed by Jimmy Haslam and witnessed by Browns board members that committed Haslam to staying out of day-to-day football operations and specifically out of any decisions related to quarterback development, playing time, or offensive strategy.
The agreement, according to sources, included financial penalties payable directly to Deion Sanders personally if Haslam violated the terms, creating actual monetary accountability rather than just promises. According to sources, the penalty structure starts at $1 million for the first violation and increases with subsequent violations, giving Haslam real incentive to honor his commitment. The third component, according to sources, was a comprehensive offensive infrastructure plan that gave Deion and Shedeur input on coaching staff additions, scheme design, and personnel decisions that would affect the quarterback position. Todd Monken reportedly committed to working directly with Deion to identify and hire offensive assistants, particularly a quarterback's coach, who would be compatible with Shedeur's development needs and who Shedeur would be comfortable working with daily. Additionally, according to sources, Monken committed to designing the Browns' offensive system around Shedeur's specific strengths, rather than forcing Shedeur to adapt to a pre-existing scheme. The fourth component, according to sources, was the formal advisory role for Deion that he mentioned on television. According to sources familiar with the contract terms, Deion's role as special advisor for player development and organizational culture includes a base salary of $3.5 million per year for 4 years, with performance bonuses that could push the annual compensation above $5 million, depending on team success metrics. The role includes office space at the Browns facility, access to all team meetings and practices, input on player acquisition and retention decisions, and authority to recommend changes to organizational policies and procedures. According to sources, the contract was structured carefully with input from NCAA compliance experts to ensure it doesn't violate any rules related to Deion's simultaneous employment as Colorado's head coach. But the fifth component, according to sources, was the one that really closed the deal and that demonstrates just how far the Browns were willing to go. According to sources, the Browns committed to facilitating what they're calling a Cleveland market maximization package for Shedeur that includes coordinated endorsement deals with Cleveland-based corporations, business partnership opportunities for Deion's media ventures and other Sanders family enterprises, and introductions to Cleveland's wealthiest business leaders and investors who could become partners or backers for various Sanders family initiatives. According to sources familiar with the financial projections, the Browns' internal estimates suggest this package could generate between $20 and $30 million in additional revenue for the Sanders family over Shedeur's first 4 years, beyond what his rookie contract would pay. When you add together Shedeur's rookie contract, which for the third overall pick is approximately $32 million over 4 years, Deion's advisory salary of potentially $20 million over 4 years, and the market maximization package of $25 to $30 million, according to sources, the total financial value to the Sanders family of Shedeur going to Cleveland approaches or potentially exceeds $100 million. That's substantially more than Shedeur would make going to almost any other team in the draft, and it represents the Browns essentially buying Deion's approval and participation in their organizational transformation. After the Browns presented this proposal on Sunday evening, according to sources, Deion asked for 24 hours to consult with his team and analyze the offer. That consultation, according to sources, involved Deion's attorney reviewing every word of the non-interference agreement to ensure it was legally enforceable, his financial advisor modeling out the revenue projections to verify they were realistic, and conversations with current Browns players, including some who participated in the recent locker room revolt, to gauge whether the organizational culture was actually improving or whether the situation remained toxic despite Haslam's promises. By Monday evening, according to sources, Deion had concluded that the Browns' offer was legitimate, that the money was real and achievable, and the organizational changes being implemented created enough upside to justify taking the risk. Deion called Haslam on Monday night, according to sources, and told him they had a deal pending final contract negotiations on the advisory role. Those negotiations, according to sources, were completed by Tuesday afternoon, and by Tuesday evening, Deion was preparing to go public with his changed position on Wednesday morning's television appearance. The reaction to Deion's bombshell announcement has been absolutely massive and deeply polarized. Within minutes of Deion revealing his new position on Cleveland, social media exploded with people calling him everything from a brilliant negotiator to a shameless sellout who abandoned his principles for money. Critics are pointing out that just 72 hours ago, Deion was calling Cleveland toxic and threatening to make Shedeur sit out rather than play there, and now he's praising them as a championship destination because they wrote him checks. These critics argue that Deion's reversal proves he was never actually concerned about organizational dysfunction or Shedeur's development. He was just using those concerns as leverage to extract a better financial package for himself. But defenders of Deion, and there are many according to social media sentiment analysis, argue that he did exactly what any smart businessman and protective father would do. He identified real problems with the Browns organization, he used his platform and influence to put public pressure on them to fix those problems, and then when they responded by actually making substantive changes and offering meaningful commitments, he recognized that the situation had improved enough to warrant reconsidering his position. According to this perspective, Deion didn't sell out his principles, he successfully negotiated for changes that address the concerns he raised, and the financial compensation he's receiving is simply fair payment for the value he's bringing to the organization through his involvement and expertise. The Cleveland Browns' official reaction to Deion's announcement has been carefully managed and extremely positive. The team issued a statement within an hour of the television appearance saying, "We're thrilled about the partnership we're building with Deion Sanders and excited about the possibility of Shedeur joining our organization. This represents a new chapter for the Browns, where we're committed to doing things the right way and building a championship culture with input from the best football minds available." According to sources, privately, the Browns are absolutely ecstatic that they've turned their biggest obstacle into their biggest asset, and that the path to drafting Shedeur is now clear. Other NFL teams, according to sources, are furious about what the Browns pulled off. Teams picking between 4th and 15th overall, several of whom were hoping that the Deion-Cleveland conflict would scare the Browns away from Shedeur and allow him to fall down the board, now realize they have no realistic shot at him unless they trade up significantly. According to sources, at least 2 teams have already reached out to the Giants and Titans, picking 2nd and 1st overall respectively, to inquire about trading up ahead of Cleveland, though the cost to do so would be prohibitive. As of now, Wednesday afternoon, February 26, 2026, the Cleveland Browns appear to have successfully executed one of the most aggressive and expensive recruiting efforts in NFL history, turning Deion Sanders from an enemy threatening to blow up their draft into a paid partner who's now publicly championing Cleveland as the perfect destination for his son. Whether this ends up being remembered as brilliant strategy or desperate overpayment will depend entirely on whether Shedeur actually develops into a franchise quarterback and whether Deion's involvement helps or hurts the organizational culture. But regardless of the outcome, the Browns just proved that in the modern NFL, literally anything is for sale if you're willing to pay the price.